On November 14, 1987, two veteran pilots walked out of a Chicago hotel at 6:47 a.m., caught on grainy security footage. They were scheduled to fly 237 passengers to Denver at 9:15 a.m. Their rental car was found idling at O'Hare International Airport, driver's door open, keys in the ignition. But Captain Michael Torres and First Officer David Chen were never seen again. No bodies, no ransom, no explanation. For 36 years, their disappearance remained one of aviation's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. Until a demolition crew broke through the walls of an abandoned airport maintenance hangar and discovered something that would turn everything we thought we knew into a nightmare. If you're fascinated by mysteries that refuse to stay buried, subscribe now, because what they found wasn't just evidence, it was a warning. The November rain fell in sheets across the tarmac at O'Hare International Airport, turning the runway lights into blurred halos of yellow and white. Sarah Vance pressed her face against the terminal window, watching the planes taxi through the downpour. She was 7 years old, clutching a stuffed rabbit her father had won for her at the state fair. "Is Daddy's plane big?" she asked her mother. Catherine Vance knelt beside her daughter, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She had been checking her watch every 3 minutes for the past hour. "Very big, sweetie, the biggest one out there." But Michael Torres's plane never took off that morning. By noon, Catherine's hands were shaking as airport security led her and Sarah to a private room. By evening, the FBI had cordoned off the rental car lot. By midnight, Sarah's stuffed rabbit sat abandoned on a plastic chair in the airport security office, its button eyes reflecting the fluorescent lights while her mother sobbed into a phone, trying to explain to Michael's parents that their son had simply vanished. The official investigation lasted 14 months. The unofficial questions lasted a lifetime. 36 years later, Sarah Vance stood in that same terminal, no longer a child clutching a toy, but a woman clutching a folder marked "Confidential." Inside were photographs that shouldn't exist, evidence that couldn't be explained, and a phone call from a demolition foreman who had whispered 3 words before the line went dead. "They're still here." The sledgehammer hit the concrete wall with a crack that echoed through Hangar 7B like a gunshot. Dust exploded into the air, and Tommy Garrett stepped back, coughing into his sleeve. The hangar had been scheduled for demolition for 3 weeks, but the city kept delaying, citing paperwork issues that made no sense. Now, on a gray Thursday morning in October 2023, the crew had finally gotten clearance to tear it down. "You good?" called Marcus from across the cavernous space, his voice bouncing off walls that hadn't seen daylight in decades. Tommy waved a hand, squinting through the dust. "Yeah, this wall's thicker." Then the specs said, "Going to take another few hits." He swung again. This time, the concrete gave way, revealing not insulation or empty space, but a small room he hadn't known existed. The blueprints they'd been given showed nothing but solid wall here. Tommy pulled his flashlight from his belt and aimed it through the hole. The beam caught something metallic, then leather, then the unmistakable shape of a human shoe. Tommy's flashlight clattered to the floor. "Marcus," he said, his voice tight and strange. "Marcus, call 911. "What? Why?" "Just do it, now." Within an hour, the hangar was swarming with police. Yellow crime scene tape blocked off the entire structure, and Detective Rachel Kim stood inside the hidden room, her breath visible in the cold air despite it being autumn. The room was approximately 8 by 10 feet, with no windows and no visible door from the inside. 2 bodies sat against the far wall, slumped in positions that suggested they had died slowly, perhaps from suffocation or dehydration. Both wore pilot uniforms. Rachel's partner, Detective James Holloway, appeared behind her, his face pale in the beam of the industrial work lights they'd set up. "The badges check out," he said quietly. "Captain Michael Torres, First Officer David Chen, missing since November 1987. Rachel crouched near the bodies, careful not to disturb anything. The uniforms were remarkably preserved, protected from the elements by the sealed room. Beside Torres's right hand lay a small notebook, its pages filled with handwriting that had faded but was still partially legible. On Chen's lap rested a flight manual, open to a page about emergency procedures. "How did they get in here?" Rachel asked, though she wasn't expecting an answer. James consulted his tablet, pulling up the architectural plans. According to records, this hangar was built in 1985. It was used for aircraft maintenance until 1989, when it was closed due to budget cuts. It's been empty ever since, locked up tight. "Someone put them here," Rachel said, standing. Her knees protested the movement. She was 42, too old to be crouching over bodies in abandoned hangars, but too invested to walk away. This wasn't an accident. This room was sealed from the outside. She photographed the scene with her department-issued camera, each flash illuminating details that made her stomach tighten. Scratches on the interior walls, deep gouges that suggested fingernails dragged across concrete. A jacket that had been arranged almost carefully on the floor between the two men, as if meant to be a pillow or a blanket. And near the corner, almost hidden in shadow, 3 words carved into the concrete with something sharp. Flight 227. Rachel photographed the words twice, making sure they were clearly visible. James, when they disappeared, what flight were they supposed to be piloting? James was already pulling up the case file on his tablet, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. His face went slack. Flight 227, Chicago to Denver, departed 2 hours late with a replacement crew after Torres and Chen failed to show. The hangar suddenly felt much colder. Sarah Vance received the call at 2:17 p.m. while sitting in her office at the Chicago Tribune. She had spent the last 15 years as an investigative journalist, and the last 36 years as the daughter of a man who had disappeared without explanation. These two identities had long ago merged into a single, relentless obsession. "Ms. Vance?" The voice on the phone was professional, careful. "This is Detective Rachel Kim with the Chicago Police Department. I'm calling regarding the 1987 disappearance of Captain Michael Torres." Sarah's pen stopped moving across her notepad. She had received calls like this before, false leads and dead ends that went nowhere. But something in the detective's tone was different this time. "Have you found something?" Sarah asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Would you be available to come to the station this evening?" "I can be there in 20 minutes." The police station smelled of old coffee and industrial cleaner, familiar scents from the dozens of times Sarah had visited over the years, chasing leads that evaporated like morning fog. But Detective Kim's expression when she led Sarah to a private conference room told her this wasn't another dead end. "We found your father," Rachel said, closing the door behind them. "We found both pilots." Sarah sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "Where?" "Hangar 7B at O'Hare. Hidden room, sealed from the outside." Rachel placed a folder on the table between them. "Ms. Vance, I need to prepare you. The circumstances are unusual, disturbing." Sarah opened the folder with hands that had gone numb. The photographs showed 2 bodies in pilot uniforms, positioned against a concrete wall in a space barely larger than a closet. Her father's face was partially preserved, recognizable despite the decades. His eyes were closed, his head tilted slightly to one side, as if he had simply fallen asleep. "How did they die?" Sarah heard herself ask. "The medical examiner is still conducting the autopsy, but preliminary findings suggest asphyxiation." The room had no ventilation. Rachel paused, choosing her words carefully. "They were alive when they were sealed inside. There's evidence they tried to escape." Sarah's vision blurred. She had spent most of her life imagining various scenarios, each one a different kind of horror. Kidnapping, murder, amnesia, voluntary disappearance. But this was something she had never considered. The systematic, deliberate entombment of 2 men who had done nothing wrong, who had simply shown up for work one Thursday morning. "Why?" Sarah whispered. "Why would someone do this?" Rachel pulled out another photograph. This one showing the carved message on the wall. Flight 227, Shern knows. We were hoping you might have some insight. Did your father ever mention anything unusual about that flight? Any concerns or suspicions? Sarah studied the photograph, her mind racing through decades of fragmented memories. Her father had been careful never to bring his work stress home, maintaining a bright cheerfulness around her even when she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. But there had been moments, brief glimpses of something darker beneath the surface. 2 weeks before he disappeared, Sarah said slowly. He came home late. I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard him arguing with my mother in the kitchen. He said something about a manifest that didn't match, about passengers who shouldn't have been on a flight. Rachel leaned forward. Did he say which flight? Sarah closed her eyes, reaching back through the fog of childhood memory. She had been 7 years old, hiding at the top of the stairs, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her father's voice had been low and urgent, angry in a way she'd never heard before. He said it was the Denver route, Sarah said, opening her eyes. He said someone was using commercial flights for something else, something wrong. My mother told him to let it go, that it wasn't his problem. But he said he couldn't. He said he was a pilot, and that meant something. Rachel and James exchanged a look. Ms. Vance, do you know if your father kept any records? Logbooks, notes, anything that might document what he discovered? The FBI took everything after he disappeared. They returned most of it years later, but I never went through it carefully. It was too painful. Sarah straightened in her chair, her journalist instincts overriding her grief. But I still have all the boxes. They're in my storage unit. Rachel stood. I'd like to examine them, if you're comfortable with that. Whatever your father found, it got him killed. And after 36 years, whoever did this probably thinks they're safe. Sarah looked down at the photograph of her father's final resting place, at the words he or Chen had carved into the wall with dying strength. Flight 227 knows. They're not safe, Sarah said quietly. Not anymore. The storage unit smelled of cardboard and time. Sarah pulled the chain on the bare bulb overhead, casting harsh light across stacks of boxes that represented the entire investigation into her father's disappearance. She had paid the rental fee every month for 36 years, unable to throw away what felt like the last pieces of him. Rachel and James stood in the doorway, letting Sarah take the lead. This was sacred ground in its way, a daughter's shrine to an unsolved mystery. The FBI boxes are on the left, Sarah said, her voice echoing slightly in the concrete space. Personal effects on the right. I kept them separate. She pulled down a banker's box marked FBI Return 1989 and set it on the folding table she kept in the unit for the rare occasions when she forced herself to search through the past. Inside were her father's logbooks, meticulously maintained records of every flight he had ever piloted. Commercial aviation required detailed documentation, and Michael Torres had been thorough to the point of obsession. Rachel pulled on latex gloves and began carefully turning pages. Each entry included date, flight number, route, aircraft type, weather conditions, and any notable incidents. Torres's handwriting was precise, almost mechanical in its consistency. Until October 1987. Here, Rachel said, pointing to an entry dated October 23rd. The handwriting changes. See how it gets more rushed? And there are margin notes. James leaned in, using his phone's flashlight to illuminate the small text. Flight 227, Chicago to Denver, standard route. But he's written something in the margin. Can you read that? Sarah moved closer, squinting at her father's cramped handwriting. Passenger manifest discrepancy. Seat 14C occupied. No boarding record. The three of them stared at the notation in silence. He noticed someone on the plane who hadn't officially boarded, James said. How is that possible? You can't get past security without a ticket and ID. Not without help, Rachel replied. She turned the page. The next entry was for October 30th, another flight 227. The margin note read, 14C again. Same passenger, spoke to Chen. He sees it too. David Chen was his regular first officer, Sarah said. They flew together twice a week on the Denver route. Rachel continued through the logbook. November 3rd. Another Flight 227, another margin note. Counted cargo. Manifest off by 200 pounds. 14C passenger carried large case, not checked through system. November 10th. Chen agrees we need to report. Who do we trust? November 13th. Meeting at hotel before flight. Chen has proof. The final entry was dated November 14th, 1987. The day they disappeared. But it wasn't in the logbook. It was on a loose piece of paper, folded and tucked into the back cover, nearly invisible. Sarah's hands shook as she unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, almost panicked. If you're reading this, something has gone wrong. Flight 227 is being used to transport something illegal. The passenger in 14C is not a passenger. He's a courier. I don't know what he's carrying, but it's heavy, expensive, and people are willing to kill to protect it. Chen and I documented everything. We were going to turn it over to the FAA today, but someone knows. Someone at the airline knows we know. The hotel phone rang at 3 a.m. No one spoke, but I could hear breathing. Chen's room got the same call. We're going to the airport early, going to find someone in federal law enforcement before our scheduled flight. If we don't make it, look for the photographs. Chen hid them somewhere safe. Gate 17, under the... The note ended mid-sentence, as if her father had been interrupted. Sarah's vision swam. He knew, she whispered. He knew they were in danger, and he walked into it anyway. Rachel carefully photographed the note, then the logbook entries. Gate 17. Does that mean anything to you? That was their usual departure gate for the Denver flights, Sarah said. But the airport's been renovated a dozen times since 1987. Gate 17 doesn't exist anymore. It's part of the international terminal now. James was already on his phone, pulling up historical airport layouts. Wait. In 1987, Gate 17 was in Concourse B. That whole section was rebuilt in 1995. He looked up, his face grim. Hangar 7B was the maintenance facility for Concourse B. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, but it was incomplete, obscured. Rachel thought about the sealed room, about two men dying slowly in the dark while above them planes took off and landed. Life continuing as if nothing was wrong. Chen hid photographs somewhere near Gate 17, Rachel said. Your father was about to write where, but someone stopped him. She looked at Sarah. Someone was watching them, someone at the hotel, someone who knew they were going to report what they'd found. And instead of just killing them quietly, making it look like an accident, they made them disappear, James added. Why? Sarah stared at her father's final words, at the abrupt end to his message. Because they needed everyone to think the pilots had run away. If they'd been found dead, there would have been an investigation into why. But if they just vanished, people would assume guilt. Embezzlement, affair, witness protection, anything except the truth. Rachel closed the logbook carefully. We need to find those photographs. If they still exist after 36 years, they're our only proof of what Torres and Chen discovered. Concourse B was demolished, James said, still scrolling through his phone. But the foundation is still there, under the new terminal. They built on top of it. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in decades. Hope, sharp and painful. Then we dig, she said. The security director at O'Hare International Airport was not pleased to receive a visit from Chicago PD at 9 o'clock at night. Gerald Summers had worked at the airport for 43 years, starting as a baggage handler in 1980 and working his way up to his current position. He met Rachel and James in his office overlooking the main terminal, his face set in practiced bureaucratic resistance. Digging under Concourse B is out of the question, he said before Rachel even finished explaining. Do you have any idea how much that would cost? How much disruption it would cause? 2 men died, Mr. Summers, Rachel replied, keeping her voice level. They were murdered and hidden in a maintenance hangar for 36 years. Whatever they found was worth killing for, and the evidence might still be on airport property. Summers leaned back in his chair, his expression softening slightly. I remember when they disappeared. I was working the early shift that day. Everyone was talking about it. The FBI was everywhere for weeks." He paused. "You really think you can solve it after all this time?" "We have to try." Summers was quiet for a long moment, then turned to his computer. "The old foundation of Concourse B runs under what's now the International Terminal's baggage claim. Most of it was filled in when they renovated, but there are some void spaces, crawl spaces essentially, that maintenance uses for accessing pipes and electrical conduits." He pulled up a schematic on his screen, a complex maze of lines and numbers that meant nothing to Rachel. "Gate 17 would have been approximately here," he said, pointing to a section of the diagram. The gate structure was demolished, but the infrastructure beneath it wasn't completely removed. There's a maintenance access point about 50 feet from where the gate used to be. "Can we access it?" James asked. "Not without proper authorization and safety equipment. Those spaces haven't been inspected in years. Could be unstable, could be full of asbestos or worse." Summers looked between them. "But if you get me a warrant, I can have a crew ready tomorrow morning, 4 a.m. before passenger traffic picks up." Rachel nodded. "We'll have the warrant." She and James left the office and walked through the terminal toward the exit. Even at night, O'Hare hummed with activity. Travelers dragged suitcases across polished floors, screens displayed endless lists of arrivals and departures, and overhead announcements echoed in languages from around the world. Somewhere in this massive complex, 2 men had walked in planning to report a crime, and had never walked out. "What do you think they found?" James asked as they pushed through the exit doors into the cold night air. Rachel thought about the logbook entries, about a passenger who appeared on flights without boarding records, about cargo that weighed more than manifests indicated. "Smuggling," she said. "Had to be. Drugs, maybe. Or weapons. Something valuable enough that people would kill to protect the operation." "But why use commercial flights? Why not just ship it through cargo services?" "Because cargo gets inspected. Passengers' carry-on bags get a cursory X-ray at best, especially back in the 80s. Security was nowhere near as tight as it is now." Rachel pulled her coat tighter against the wind. "If you had someone on the inside, someone who could get a courier past the checkpoint without proper documentation, you could move product in and out of major cities undetected." They reached Rachel's car, and she paused with her hand on the door handle. The airport stretched out behind them, a city unto itself, lights blazing against the dark sky. How many crimes had been committed here over the decades? How many people had walked through those terminals carrying secrets, guilt, contraband? "Torres and Chen were good men," Rachel said quietly. "They saw something wrong and decided to do the right thing, and it got them sealed in a concrete tomb." James climbed into the passenger seat. "So we find the photographs. We finish what they started." Rachel started the engine, but didn't immediately pull away. She looked at the terminal, at the places where old structures had been torn down and new ones built on top. The airport was a palimpsest, layers of history written over each other, each generation believing they'd erased what came before. But nothing was ever truly erased. Bodies had a way of surfacing. Secrets had a way of refusing to stay buried. "Tomorrow morning," she said, putting the car in gear. 4 a.m., we find out what was worth dying for." As they drove away from the airport, neither of them noticed the dark sedan that pulled out of a parking spot 3 rows back and followed at a careful distance. Headlights dimmed, maintaining the perfect interval that suggested professional surveillance. Some secrets didn't want to be found, and some secrets had protectors who never stopped watching. The maintenance access tunnel under O'Hare's International Terminal was barely 5 feet high, forcing Rachel to walk in a crouch that made her back ache within minutes. The beam of her flashlight cut through darkness that felt ancient, undisturbed. Behind her, James breathed heavily, and 2 airport maintenance workers followed, their own lights creating dancing shadows on concrete walls slick with condensation. 4 a.m. had come too quickly. Rachel had managed perhaps 2 hours of sleep, her mind churning through the case details, constructing and deconstructing theories. now squeezing through spaces that felt like they wanted to collapse. She wondered if they were chasing ghosts. "According to the schematics, we're directly under where Gate 17 used to be," said Marcus Chen, one of the maintenance workers. He was David Chen's nephew, had insisted on being part of the search team when he heard what they were looking for. The old gate structure had a service closet. If your guy hid something, that's the most logical place. The tunnel opened slightly into a wider space, tall enough for Rachel to stand upright. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a steady rhythm that sounded like a clock counting down. The walls here were older, different concrete, rougher. This was original construction from the 1980s. "There," Marcus said, pointing to what looked like a service panel in the wall. That would have been the back of the closet. They just sealed it over when they renovated. James approached the panel, running his gloved hands along its edges. "It's been opened before, recently. See these marks?" He indicated fresh scratches around the edges, barely visible but distinct against the aged concrete. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. "Someone else is looking for the photographs, or already found them," James said, pulling a crowbar from his equipment bag. He wedged it into the gap and pulled. The panel resisted, then gave way with a crack that echoed through the tunnel. Behind it was a small cavity, perhaps 2 feet deep. Rachel aimed her flashlight inside. The space was empty except for a metal toolbox, the kind mechanics used, pushed far back into the corner. It was coated in dust, but otherwise appeared untouched. "That's not original airport equipment," Marcus said. "Someone put that there." James carefully reached in and pulled the box out. It was heavier than it looked, and something inside shifted when he moved it. He set it on the ground, and they all stood around it like archaeologists who had just unearthed an ancient artifact. "Should we open it here?" James asked. Rachel shook her head. "We document it in situ, then take it to the station. I want everything by the book." But even as she said it, she was crouching down, examining the box more closely. There was no lock, just a simple latch. And on the top, barely visible under the dust, someone had scratched 2 letters. MT Michael Torres. Rachel's hand moved toward the latch almost of its own accord. She needed to see. After 36 years, Sarah Vance needed to see what her father had died trying to protect. The latch clicked open. Inside the box, wrapped in plastic that had yellowed with age, was a camera and 3 rolls of film in their original canisters. Beneath them was a small notebook, identical to the one they'd found with Torres's body. And at the bottom, sealed in a plastic bag, was a passenger manifest for Flight 227, dated November 10th, 1987. Rachel photographed everything before touching anything. Then, carefully, she lifted out the notebook and opened it. David Chen's handwriting filled the pages, neater than Torres's but equally urgent. The first entry was dated October 20th, 1987. Torres noticed passenger boarding without scanning ticket. Gate agent waved him through. I checked manifest later. No record of passenger in 14C, but seat was occupied during flight. Torres took photograph. Rachel turned pages, each entry more disturbing than the last. Chen had documented 8 separate flights where the same passenger appeared in seat 14C without any official record. The passenger always carried the same large metal case. The passenger always deplaned through a service door, bypassing regular passenger egress. And the passenger was always accompanied by a ground crew member wearing an airline uniform. Chen had managed to photograph him too. The final entry was dated November 13th. Developed the photographs at a drugstore, paid cash. Torres and I are meeting tomorrow at hotel to go over evidence before taking it to FAA. The gate agent is named Raymond Holloway. He's been with the airline for 6 years. Impeccable record, but he's the one waving the courier through security. We have him on camera. We have the courier on camera. We have the cargo manifest discrepancies documented across 2 months. Tomorrow we end this. Rachel felt ice flood her veins. She looked up at James. Raymond Holloway. Any relation? James's face had gone white. My father was Raymond Holloway. He worked for United Airlines from 1981 until he retired in 2003. The tunnel suddenly felt much smaller. the darkness pressing in from all sides. Rachel's mind raced, trying to make sense of what this meant. James had been on this case from the beginning, had been the one to suggest searching the storage unit, had been present for every development. "James," she said carefully, "when did your father die?" "He didn't. He's in a nursing home in Evanston. Dementia." James was staring at the notebook as if it might bite him. "I visit him every Sunday. He doesn't remember me anymore." "Did he ever talk about his work? About anything unusual?" "No, he was just a gate agent. He checked tickets, helped passengers, worked the desk." James's voice was hollow. "He was a good man. He was my father." Marcus Chen spoke up, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "My Uncle David disappeared trying to expose what your father was part of." "We don't know what he was part of," Rachel said, keeping her voice level despite her own racing thoughts. "We don't know if he was complicit or coerced. We don't know anything yet except what's in this notebook." But even as she said it, she was thinking about the bodies in Hangar 7B, about 2 men sealed in a concrete room to die slowly. That kind of murder required cold calculation. It required people willing to do whatever necessary to protect their operation. "The photographs," she said. "We need to develop the film. That's our proof." She gathered everything carefully back into the toolbox, then looked at James, her partner, her friend, the son of a man who might have helped murder 2 pilots. "James, you're off this case." "Rachel, you're too close. You know it and I know it. Go home. I'll handle the film and the evidence processing." For a moment she thought he might argue, but then something in his eyes shifted, a resignation that looked like grief. "Okay," he said quietly. "But Rachel, my father didn't kill anyone. I know him. Whatever he did, he wasn't a murderer." Rachel didn't respond. She had been a detective long enough to know that everyone was capable of murder under the right circumstances. Fear, greed, desperation, all could transform ordinary people into killers. They made their way back through the tunnel in silence, the toolbox carried like a coffin between them. The photo lab specialist at the Chicago PD was a woman named Ellen Rodriguez, who had been developing crime scene photographs for 23 years. She handled the old film canisters with the reverence of a museum curator examining Dead Sea Scrolls. "Film this old is unpredictable," she said, examining the canisters in her dark room. "It might have degraded completely, or it might be perfectly preserved. We won't know until we try." Rachel stood in the red-lit darkness watching Ellen work. She had sent James home 6 hours ago, had spent the morning filing paperwork and avoiding thinking about what it meant that James's father was implicated in the case. Now, at 2 in the afternoon, she was finally about to see what Michael Torres and David Chen had photographed 36 years ago. Ellen worked in silence, her movements practiced and efficient. The developing chemicals smelled sharp, acrid. Rachel found herself holding her breath as the first image began to materialize in the tray, ghosts becoming solid, truth emerging from blank paper. The first photograph showed Gate 17 as it had appeared in 1987. The camera had been positioned at an angle, probably hidden, shooting across the boarding area. Passengers lined up, normal people with carry-on bags and boarding passes. But in the corner of the frame, near the gate desk, was a man in his 30s wearing a business suit and carrying a large metal briefcase. He was speaking with a gate agent whose face was clearly visible. Raymond Holloway, James's father, looking 20 years younger but unmistakable. Ellen moved to the next image. This one showed the same passenger walking through the gate area while other passengers waited in line. The photo captured the moment Holloway waved him through without scanning his boarding pass. In the background, other passengers looked confused, one woman pointing as if asking a question. The third photograph was the most damning. It showed the cargo hold of an aircraft, presumably taken through a window or from a service area. The man with the briefcase was visible, along with 2 men in ground crew uniforms. One of them was opening the briefcase, and even in the grainy photograph, Rachel could see stacks of something rectangular. Not money. The size and shape were wrong. Bricks, possibly, wrapped in plastic. Drugs, Ellen said quietly, studying the image. Has to be. Cocaine, maybe. Early 90s was the height of the cocaine trade from South America into the United States. Rachel's phone buzzed. A text from the station. Warrant approved for Raymond Holloway's home and nursing home room. Team standing by. She typed back, "Execute. I'm on my way." The nursing home in Evanston was called Sunrise Gardens, a name that promised hope and warmth but delivered the antiseptic reality of elderly people waiting to die. Rachel showed her badge at the front desk, explained the warrant, and was led to Raymond Holloway's room by a nervous administrator. "Mr. Holloway has good days and bad days," the administrator explained. "Today is a bad day. He probably won't be able to answer your questions coherently." The room was small, painted in cheerful yellow that felt like mockery. Raymond Holloway sat in a wheelchair by the window, staring out at a parking lot. He was 73 years old, his hair completely white, his face mapped with wrinkles. He wore pajamas and slippers, and his hands trembled slightly in his lap. "Mr. Holloway?" Rachel said gently, pulling a chair to sit across from him. "My name is Detective Kim. I need to ask you some questions about your work at O'Hare International Airport." Raymond's eyes moved to her face, but there was no recognition there, no understanding. Just the vague, pleasant confusion of someone whose mind had left them years ago. "O'Hare," he repeated, the word empty of meaning. Rachel pulled out one of the photographs, the one showing him waving the passenger through security. "Do you remember this? Do you remember helping a man board flights without proper documentation?" Raymond looked at the photograph. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, fear. But then it was gone, replaced by confusion. "I don't remember," he said. "Is it time for lunch?" The search team was going through his belongings methodically. His room contained almost nothing personal. A few photographs of James as a child, a framed medal from his years of service at the Airline, a small television that was playing a game show with the sound off. But in the drawer of his nightstand, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was a lockbox. "Detective," one of the officers called, "you need to see this." Rachel opened the lockbox. Inside was $50,000 in cash, neatly banded. Beneath the money was a passport with Raymond Holloway's photograph, but a different name, Robert Hayes. And beneath that was a handwritten note on yellowed paper. The note read, "Your debt is paid. The pilots are handled. You never speak of this to anyone. You retire quietly. You live your life. If you talk, your son dies." It was unsigned, but at the bottom, in different handwriting, Raymond had written, "I'm sorry. God forgive me. I didn't know they would kill them. I didn't know." Rachel photographed everything, then looked at Raymond Holloway, this broken old man who had once been young and desperate enough to help smuggle drugs through a major airport, who had been complicit in the murder of two good men, who had lived 36 years with the knowledge of what he'd done. "Mr. Holloway," she said, though she knew it was useless, "who gave you this note? Who was running the operation?" Raymond looked at her with eyes that were somewhere else, sometime else. "The planes," he said softly. "They never stop, day and night. They never stop flying." His gaze returned to the window, to the parking lot and the gray sky beyond. Whatever he knew, whatever he remembered, was locked inside a mind that had become its own kind of prison. Rachel left the nursing home with the evidence boxed and cataloged. But as she drove back to the station, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were still missing something crucial. Raymond Holloway had been a tool, a means to an end. But who had been wielding him? Who had killed Torres and Chen? Who had sealed them in that room? Her phone rang. Sarah Vance. "Detective, you need to meet me at my apartment immediately. Someone broke in. They went through all my father's boxes, and they left something behind." Rachel's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "What did they leave?" "A photograph," Sarah said, her voice shaking. "Of me. Taken yesterday when I was leaving my office. with a note that says, "Drop this. Something should stay buried." The case was no longer cold. It was alive, and it was watching them. Sarah's apartment looked like a tornado had passed through it. Boxes were overturned, their contents scattered across the hardwood floor. Photographs of her father lay trampled, boot prints visible on their surfaces. The violation of the space felt personal, calculated to terrorize rather than simply search. Rachel stood in the doorway, taking in the scene while uniformed officers dusted for prints. Sarah sat on her couch, arms wrapped around herself, the threatening photograph clutched in one hand. "They didn't take anything," Sarah said, her voice hollow. "They just wanted me to know they could get to me whenever they wanted." Rachel examined the photograph. It showed Sarah leaving the Tribune building, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. The angle suggested the photographer had been positioned in a parked car. Professional, patient. The note was printed on plain white paper. Untraceable. "Drop this. Some things should stay buried." "We're putting protection on you," Rachel said. 24-hour surveillance. They killed my father for trying to expose them. You think a patrol car is going to stop them?" Rachel didn't have an answer for that. She knew Sarah was right. Whoever was behind this had demonstrated a willingness to commit murder to protect their secrets. One journalist, one detective. These were acceptable casualties in their calculus. Her phone rang. It was Ellen from the lab. "Detective, I finished developing the rest of the film. There's something you need to see." 20 minutes later, Rachel stood in the photo lab staring at an image that changed everything. The photograph showed 3 men in what appeared to be an airport office. One was the courier who had been using seat 14C. One was Raymond Holloway. And the third was a man in his 50s wearing an expensive suit, his face clearly visible. "I ran him through facial recognition," Ellen said. "Gerald Summers. He's been director of security at O'Hare since 2010. Rachel felt the floor shift beneath her. Summers, the man who had been so helpful yesterday, who had given them access to the maintenance tunnels, who knew exactly where they'd be and when. Summers, who had worked at the airport since 1980, who would have been in his early 20s when the smuggling operation was running. "He was part of it," Rachel said. "From the beginning. He wasn't just involved, he was running security. He would have known every camera angle, every blind spot, every way to move product through the airport undetected." She pulled out her phone to call James, then hesitated. James, whose father had been complicit. James, who might have grown up knowing more than he'd admitted. But no, she'd known James for 8 years, worked dozens of cases with him. If he was dirty, she would have seen signs. She called him anyway. "I need you back on this," she said when he answered. "I don't care about the conflict of interest. Your father was used, probably threatened, but Gerald Summers at O'Hare Security, he's one of them. And he knows we're getting close." There was silence on the line. Then James said, "I'm already at the airport." "What? Why?" "Because my father woke up this morning more lucid than he's been in years. And he told me something. He said Gerald Summers visited him in the nursing home 2 days ago, before we found the bodies. Asked him if he'd told anyone about the old days. My father said no, but Summers didn't believe him." Rachel's blood went cold. "James, get out of there, now!" "It's too late. I'm already in his office, and he's not here, but his computer is unlocked. Rachel, there are files here. Passenger manifests going back to the 80s, financial records, names." His voice rose slightly. This wasn't just about drugs. They were moving people too. Witnesses, criminals, I don't know. But they've been running an underground railroad through O'Hare for 40 years. Rachel was already moving, heading for her car. "Don't touch anything else. Don't download anything. Just get out." "I'm taking photographs. This is evidence. We need—" The line went dead. Rachel called dispatch as she ran. "Officer down. Detective James Holloway. O'Hare International Airport, Security Office. Send everyone." The drive to the airport took 12 minutes that felt like hours. Rachel's mind raced through scenarios, each one worse than the last. Summers had military training. She'd seen it in his file. Special forces before he came to the airport. A man who knew how to kill quickly and quietly. She arrived to find airport police already swarming the security office. James was on the floor, unconscious but breathing. A gash on his head bled freely, and paramedics were already working on him. "What happened?" Rachel demanded. An airport officer answered. Anonymous 911 call reported sounds of a struggle. We found Detective Holloway in this. He held up a plastic evidence bag containing a pistol, registered to Gerald Summers. He left in a hurry. His office computer is wiped, but your detective here was smart. He was sending photos to a cloud server. Rachel knelt beside James. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Rachel," he mumbled. "I got it. I got everything. Don't talk, just rest." Summers knows. He has people everywhere. He said the bodies were a mistake, that we were never supposed to find them. The hangar was supposed to be demolished years ago but kept getting delayed. James coughed, wincing. He said it was just business, that Torres and Chen should have looked the other way like everyone else. Rachel felt rage building in her chest, cold and sharp. "Where did he go?" "I don't know, but he said something else. He said there are others. That this isn't over even if we catch him. That the operation is bigger than one airport, bigger than one man." Paramedics were insisting James needed to be transported. Rachel stood, letting them work. She looked around the office at the signs of a hasty departure. Coffee still warm on the desk. Computer monitor dark but humming. A man who had spent 40 years building an invisible empire, now forced to run. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You found the pawns, congratulations. But the game is far from over. Stop now, or everyone you love becomes a target. We've been patient for 36 years. We can be patient a little longer." Attached to the text was a photograph. Sarah Vance, walking into the police station. Time stamped from 15 minutes ago. Rachel's hands shook as she forwarded the message to her captain. Then she called Sarah. "Where are you right now?" "Still at the station, in the conference room going through more of my dad's files." "Why?" "Stay there. Don't leave. Don't go anywhere alone. And Sarah, we need to assume they're watching us, all of us, all the time." Through the office window, Rachel could see planes taking off and landing. Hundreds of flights every day, millions of passengers every year. And somewhere in that vast system, hidden in plain sight, was a network that had been operating since before she was born. Her father's killer was just one piece of a much larger machine. But they had photographs now. They had evidence. They had James's downloaded files, whatever he'd managed to save before Summers attacked him. It wasn't over. But for the first time in 36 years, the people who had killed Michael Torres and David Chen were running scared. Rachel watched another plane lift into the gray Chicago sky and made a silent promise to two men who had died trying to do the right thing. She would finish what they started, no matter how long it took. 6 months later, Sarah Vance stood at Gate 17 in O'Hare's International Terminal. The space looked nothing like it had in 1987, all modern glass and steel, but she knew she was standing approximately where her father had stood on his last morning, where he had seen something wrong and decided to act. The Tribune had run her story in a 6-part series. The articles detailed everything: the smuggling operation, the murders, the conspiracy of silence that had lasted 4 decades. Gerald Summers had been arrested in Mexico trying to board a flight to Brazil. He was fighting extradition, but the evidence was overwhelming. James's downloaded files contained records of over 300 illegal transports, including drugs, money, and, as he had suspected, fugitives from justice. Raymond Holloway had passed away in his sleep 2 weeks after they found the evidence. The doctors said it was a stroke, but Sarah liked to think that perhaps, in some last moment of clarity, he had found a measure of peace, knowing the truth was finally coming out. James Holloway had returned to work, though he'd requested a transfer to financial crimes. Too many ghosts at the airport, he'd said. Sarah understood. She herself hadn't flown since the story broke. couldn't bring herself to walk through a terminal without seeing her father's ghost in every pilot who passed. But today was different. Today she was meeting someone. Rachel Kim appeared from the concourse carrying a single bag. She'd taken a leave of absence, needed time to process everything they'd uncovered. But there was something in her expression that suggested she'd found something resembling closure. "Thank you for coming," Sarah said. "I wanted to see it, the place where it started." They stood together in silence, watching travelers rush past, everyone focused on their own destinations, their own lives. None of them knowing that 36 years ago, 2 men had died here trying to protect people just like them. "They're naming the new pilot training center after them," Sarah said. "The Torres Chen Memorial Center. It opens next year." Rachel nodded. "That's good. They deserve to be remembered. My therapist says I need to forgive, not the people who killed him, but the universe for taking him from me. That I've spent my whole life angry at the wrong things." Sarah smiled sadly. "I don't know if I can do that." "You don't have to forgive anything," Rachel said. "You just have to keep living, keep telling the truth. That's what your father would want." From her bag, Sarah pulled out a small box. Inside was her father's captain's pin, the one he'd worn on every flight, the one the FBI had returned to her mother after he disappeared. She'd been carrying it for 36 years. She opened the box and looked at the pin one last time. Then, carefully, she set it on a nearby window ledge, propped against the glass where morning light caught its metal surface. "For you, Dad," she whispered. "Your flight is finally complete." They walked together back through the terminal, past security checkpoints and gate agents and passengers with their carry-on luggage. The airport continued its eternal rhythm, planes arriving and departing, people coming and going, the machinery of modern life grinding forward without pause. But Sarah felt lighter than she had in years. The mystery was solved. The killers were facing justice. Her father's name was cleared, his courage recognized. It didn't bring him back. It didn't erase 36 years of grief. But it was something. It was enough. Behind them, the captain's pin gleamed in the window, a small memorial to 2 men who had seen evil and refused to look away. Travelers passed it without noticing, too focused on their own journeys to see the tiny piece of history sitting in plain sight. But it was there, a reminder that some people still choose to do the right thing, even when it costs them everything. The pin remained on that window ledge for 3 days before security noticed it and turned it in to lost and found. By then, Sarah was gone, finally ready to start living again, carrying her father's memory not as a burden, but as a blessing. Flight 227 still operated daily from Chicago to Denver, though with a different flight number now. The airline had quietly retired the designation, a small acknowledgement of the 2 pilots who never completed their final journey. But sometimes, late at night when the terminal was quiet and only cleaning crews walked the empty corridors, gate agents swore they could see them. 2 men in pilot uniforms standing near Gate 17, checking their watches, preparing for a flight that would never take off. Keeping watch, making sure the plane stayed safe, making sure no one else would die trying to tell the truth.